First, welcome Year 11s, teachers, and everyone else that's come to attend the debate. There's a few housekeeping rules that I need to get through first before we begin. First one is, this is the final summative assessment piece for our Stage 1 Year 11 class. So that means that they are getting assessed on what they're doing today. We have cameras here, I go back, I watch it, and I give them their SACE grade for this. They've elected to do this in front of you guys for a more genuine experience. So that means that we do have some pretty strict expectations of the audience. First, if you need to go to the bathroom or you need to leave for whatever reason, please do not do that while the speakers are speaking. There will be time in between each speaker where if you do need to leave, then you can go in that time. Similarly, if you're going to return, say from the bathroom, please do not just walk in. Please wait till someone comes and grab you. We'll come out in between each speaker and see if there's anybody there. Only come in at that time. Reason for that is, you guys know speaking in front of an audience and a class is really stressful, okay? To have your assessment being graded on it is even more stressful. So what I don't want is for these guys to be distracted by movement on top of that. Second thing is noise. Guys, while the speakers are speaking, you guys are silent, okay? For the exact same reason as why I don't want anybody walking in and out while they're speaking. You are welcome to have a quiet chat amongst yourselves in between speakers, that's absolutely fine. But in terms of any noise while the speakers are speaking, we won't tolerate it. Second thing is, there's a few people that I'd like to thank. First, I'd like to thank Michelle for agreeing to be our timekeeper. She has a lot of experience with bells, and I'm sure she'll do a great job. I'd also like to thank Mr. Jackson for adjudicating last minute. It was meant to be Miss Warnock, but she's not here today, so thank you for agreeing to do that. I'd also like to thank Mr. Tucker and Mr. Granlease for the technical support, because to be honest, these lights I would never have been able to do this, so thank you very much to all of you. So there is a process to the debates, and I'll explain that process now. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Mr. Savas, and I will be the chairman for the debate. I've already introduced Michelle as timekeeper and Mr. Jackson as adjudicator. The topic for the debate is that potential parents should pass a compulsory psychological exam before being allowed to have children. Both teams are from Underdale High School, and as stated, this is their final summative assessment. The speaking time for this debate is 5 minutes. A single warning bell will sound before the speaking time. Michelle, can you please sound the bell for the audience? A double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell will be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off. I'll give you guys 30 seconds to do that. Okay. A speaker's time will begin as soon as they are called by the chair. Please ensure, I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Victoria Nicolopoulos.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate today is potential parents should pass a compulsory psychological examination to be allowed to have children. Our team defines this topic to mean that psychological examination should be compulsory so as to diagnose severe mental illnesses in potential parents and provide any necessary support to them before they are allowed to have children. It must be clarified that this would not justify or give way to the promotion of abortion or child removal. We, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. Today, as first speaker, I will be discussing the effect mental illness has on children and the intergenerational impact that these effects create. Our second speaker will discuss why psychological testing is a valid solution to this issue and how it simultaneously destigmatizes mental illness and encourages parents to seek help. Finally, our third speaker will provide a rebuttal and a case summary. It is crucial to understand that compulsory psychological examination of potential parents would not come to fruition without reason. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 1 in 5 children have a parent with a mental illness. This equates to 1,095,100 children, which alone is a staggering number. However, it becomes even more concerning when you consider what parental mental illness can entail for the child in question. It has been understood by a variety of studies, including those conducted by the Medical Journal of Australia, that mental illness can compromise the way in which parents care for and interact with their children. This compromise comes in many forms depending on the individual. However, the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists have established that the care of infants, children, and adolescents can be complicated by mental illness through reduced emotional availability and an impaired ability to support child development. This means for some innocent infants and children that their parents neglect to perform basic, essential tasks such as feeding, clothing, and nurturing them into adulthood, as concluded by the South Australian Department for Families and Communities. It was also reported by caseworkers under this department that mentally ill parents lacked empathy and insight and held unrealistic expectations as to the responsibility and independence of their child. I'm certain we can all agree that this behaviour is synonymous with child neglect and its direct hindrance of the healthy, happy development that a child deserves. Upon hearing our perspective, you may have questioned the ethics of this issue from the parent's standpoint, and that compulsory psychological exams are much too forceful to be considered ethical, or that they're an infringement on the parent's right to freedom. However, let me ask you a question. What exactly is ethical about denying the basic needs from a child who is utterly dependent on the care and nurture of their parents? It must be acknowledged, however, that parents are not totally at fault here, which will be further discussed in our preceding arguments. Child welfare is not the only concern in this issue. In fact, it is the intergenerational impact of parental mental illness that is even more so harrowing than what has been discussed so far. The type of trauma I have outlined typically gives way to the same patterns of behaviour not only in adulthood, but in parenthood. The Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists has also found that adults whose parents had a mental illness had a significantly higher risk of developing a mental illness themselves. Furthermore, several studies have indicated that the incidence of depression, anxiety, ADHD, and substance abuse in adults becomes greater when parental mental illness is a factor. This is also reflected in the findings of Psychology Today Australia, which states that 20 to 45% of instances of anxiety and major depressive disorders, 50 to 60% of instances of alcoholism, and 75% of instances of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and ADHD in adults are genetically inherited. Of course, these traits are then expressed in the children of these adults, and a downward intergenerational spiral is perpetuated. The fact of the matter is, mental illness in parents is more often than not the catalyst that sparks an intergenerational cycle of trauma and is a serious point of concern. This is why we, the affirmative team, are of the firm belief that the compulsory psychological examination of potential parents should be used as a mechanism to once and for all break this cycle of trauma for the benefit of society, parents, and the future generations of our children. Thank you.
The first speaker from the negative team, Atticus Sweck.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. The topic of our debate is potential parents should pass a compulsory psychological examination before being allowed to have children. Both teams agree with the definition that of a psychological exam testing the mental stability of a person. except we disagree on certain aspects. The affirmative team believing that it is impossible to pass a psychological exam, with the opposition team, my team, believing that it is possible to fail or pass a psychological exam, which can be humiliating. We also believe it is a staunch violation of human rights. Anyway, our first speaker, I'll outline how compulsory psychological examinations will lead to secret births and how this could bring about more issues raising children underground in constant fear of authorities. I will also talk about how there are already entire schools dedicated to helping people who are mentally unstable. Our second speaker will be talking about the gross infringement of human rights, and our third speaker will be rebutting and summing up our points. But first, their first point. They believe not testing the mental stability of parents will lead to a cycle of mental health issues. While it is true, some children are more likely to have mental health issues due to their parents, it is not guaranteed. A study according to Medical News Today found that common genetic variation accounted for only 17 to 28% of the 5 mental illnesses studied, not to mention how some parents change after having a child for the better, not to even begin to understand the thousands of reasons why people become mentally unstable, with like discrimination, social isolation, losing a job, loved one, divorce, or trauma, just to pick a few. The affirmative team's first speaker's other point is the effects of mentally unstable parents on children. They claim young children being around unstable adults can affect the mental stability of young children. This is also not guaranteed. Parents don't need to be mentally unstable to give their own children mental illnesses. Physical or emotional abuse can affect children, not being in the presence of a mentally unstable parent. According to Children's First, a national children's charity from Scotland, which argues the same as my last point, which also works for this point. There are many reasons children develop mental illnesses. Domestic violence, for an example, being one of the main causes of mental instability mentioned by Children's First. Only 16% of domestic violence events involve one of the members being mentally unstable, with a sample of 416,000. I appreciate their idea of trying to free the children of tomorrow for mental illnesses. It just won't work. Anyway, I'll be discussing how this program can be avoided, which would cause more problems than it does solutions. And my second point, children already receive necessary attention at school, especially if they show early signs of mental instability. Now, this government program can be avoided and would encourage unsafe birthing practices. Put in simple words, people don't want to have the government invading their life or testing their mental stability. Most mentally unstable people suffer paranoia to an extent. This group of people barely trust the government's COVID vaccine. Let's also say many of these individuals want to have a child. Some couples would end up raising a family without the government being aware, making the children undocumented aliens. Studies show that children born outside a hospital without licensed midwives have over 4 times the chance of dying. This would include 100% of the children born without the government knowing. Better to live mentally unstable than die young. Let's hope for the best. Let's say that a child is born happy and healthy to 2 mentally unstable parents who don't want to be monitored by the government, telling them how to raise their own children. What if they break an arm, a leg, hit their head? What if they get a cold? Where do they go? Being illegitimate means they have no healthcare, they have no doctors, they have no medical care at all. They need more than a blessing from the Lord just to make it to 30. These secret children also have no education, they have no right to work. They are doomed for what short life they live just because they have mentally unstable parents wanting a better privacy. There are already heaps of programs dedicated to ensuring children with mental illnesses get the utmost start in life. 435 special schools exist in Australia alone, each of these catering specifically for children that are mentally unstable. Instead of trying to eradicate mental instability across the country, we should accept it is inevitable and try to help them. The society we live in understands children aren't as developed, strong, and independent like adults. That is why they go to school. At school, children are monitored by stable adults all day. If someone shows early signs of mental instability, they can be transferred to a school where every teacher is trained with how to deal with mentally unstable children and give them the best future possible. Sending kids to an entire facility dedicated to helping them is 1,000 times more efficient than sending babysitters to monitor them and their parents in their own home. To conclude my speech, enforcing potential parents to take psychological examinations and having babysitters invade the life of parents and children is a bad idea. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Syra Libra.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that potential parents should pass compulsory psychological examination before being allowed to have children. We, the affirmative team, agree with this statement. The first speaker from the negative team has attempted to form an impression that the idea proposed isn't practical. The proposal is unprecedented, thus I agree it may induce some unforeseen risks. However, these risks are worth taking. A psychological exam could liberate an entire generation of individuals from the prospect of inheriting a mental disorder. The negative speaker's first point regarding secret births is a slippery slope fallacy. He predicts, without any definitive evidence, that many parents will secretly give birth. Because of this test, and all of his statistics are based on this idea, invalidating his argument. Knowing all the difficulties it encompasses, realistically, how many parents do you think would secretly give birth over taking a psychological exam? Moreover, he said that only 16% of domestic abuse cases were linked to mental illness. And although this is true, the only 16% refers to 65,000 cases specific to domestic violence. For a country that spends $60 billion on mental health, this number is excessively high. Now to his next point. Although adults in school monitor children, this only occurs after the age of 4 or 5. Does the child not suffer before that age? Even after enrolling in a school, many children are reluctant to express their true feelings regarding mental illnesses and may not display obvious symptoms that can be identified by teachers. Lastly, he said that the program intends to babysit the mentally ill parents to monitor them. This is completely misleading, as those who qualify for treatment will attend the standard psychology sessions. Our first speaker, Victoria, stated that mental illnesses are intergenerational, and the children of mentally ill parents can be subjected to neglect. Parents are critical in forming the facets of their child's personality and in providing a nourishing lifestyle. Their mental health issues will directly reflect on the child's growth and development, thus hindering the child's mental health and causing ADHD or anxiety, repeating the cycle. Now to my first argument. Psychological examinations are an effective method in ensuring that people with mental illnesses receive the vital support they require. According to the Australian Psychological Society, such assessments are highly effective in examining a patient's psychological or cognitive functioning. Today, general practitioners perform mental evaluations and refer ill patients to psychologists who customize a psychological treatment for the referred patient, increasing validity. Patients diagnosed with situational mental illnesses can receive support from family members if they're reluctant to receive professional treatment. Although psychological tests encompass a slight probability of incorrect resulting, they are advertently developed so they're difficult to mislead and have been recognized to be as valid as medical tests by the American Psychological Association. According to the Black Dog Institute, 54% of mentally ill patients will not access any treatment, whose mental health deteriorates because of serious problems in detection. Comparatively, 75% of the patients admitted into public mental health services improved notably with immediate and long-term improvements. Now to my second point. We should not disregard psychological examinations as an effective method of testing mental illnesses and occur in various circumstances today. Presently, jobs that comprise of highly stressful environments, such as the medical field or law, necessitate psychological testing. Raising children is possibly the most critical commitment in the world. If such jobs can require mental evaluations, parenting, which involves physical exhaustion and mental strain, should also oblige examination. Now to my third point. Such an examination should be compulsory to support normalizing discussion concerning mental health. The World Health Organization has conjectured that depression will be the leading health concern for developed and developing countries as early as 2030. A recent survey by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare indicated that 45% of Australians will experience a mental disorder in their lifetime. Even today, people can voluntarily undergo a psychological examination, but the majority do not acknowledge the choice of a test. By imposing the compulsory examination, potential parents become obligated to undertake such testing and this empowers people to seek help, normalizing the issue. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, for the future of Australia and the coming generations, a compulsory psychological exam will help resolve the current pandemic of mental health issues and help progress our society in its entirety by destigmatizing mental illnesses. Thank you.
I now call upon the second negative speaker, Amir Al-Faili.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that potential parents must pass compulsory psychological examinations before being allowed to have children. We, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you about the effectivity of psychological examinations, their importance, and their validity. This is wrong because are we sure that these examinations will drop the amount of future mental illness sufferers? And how will those with perfect mental health, the ones who are valid to raise children, be ensured that they will not cause the trauma that the affirmative team are concerned about to their children? If the future regarding mental illness sufferers is something that's concerned, the children should be the ones put through these examinations to ensure that they do not have illnesses. Due to the fact that mental implications can come from all aspects of life, not just the caregivers, as proven by the fact that there is only 10% chance of passing down such illnesses. She also stated that these compulsory mental examinations would destigmatize mental health. This is incorrect. Yes, we provide awareness, and there might be a slight increase that people seek the treatment, but think about mandating these examinations. This will cause protests. How would you feel if you were forced to undertake a psychological examination, exposing your mental condition against your will? If you were like example forcing Australian citizens to do something, let's look at Sydney. Huge anti-lockdown riots encouraged by the government, forced lockdowns. Our first speaker previously stated that putting parents through psychological examinations will not work and will instead cause difficulties such as clandestine births and associated issues, as well as the fact that parents shouldn't pass these examinations as the upbringing of the concerned children will be closely examined. As second negative speaker, I will introduce basic human rights with regard to childbirth and how the proposal would infringe upon those rights declared by the Australian Human Rights Commission, as well as the government cannot cover the financial costs and provide the necessary support for parents. With regard to my first point, to force parents to engage in compulsory examinations which will determine their capability and prohibit them from raising children is a human right infringement. No parent should lose the right for physical custody due to their incapability. As well as the fact that humans have the right to choose to have or not have a child, meaning that no evaluation should decide they cannot. Adding on to this, declared by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for Childbirth from the UN, Article 26 states that parents have the prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Continuing on to my second point, forcing mental examinations can also cause more implications than support. How are you sure the government can cover financial costs of all the treatments for sufferers? Adding on, the number of mental supporters and time in operations such as this would take. Mental health issues are estimated to cost the Australian government more than $60 billion annually. This is a huge sum for these issues, and adding on a huge scale plans such as not only be an inconvenience, but as well as cost requirements for mental support jobs such as a psychiatrist need to oversee, plan, and review examinations, and also therapists needed to oversee sessions for weeks on end with endless patients due to one slight defect. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, our team strongly believes that parents should not have to pass a psychological examination, highlighting their mental defects to be able to have a child. How would you feel if you're labelled mentally unfit, therefore unable to have a child? Thank you.
I now call upon the third affirmative speaker, Jessica Libra.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate today is that all potential parents should have to pass a compulsory psychological exam before being able to have children. We, the affirmative team, consider this statement to be true.
The first negative speaker has ludicrously mentioned that imposing a straightforward psychological test will lead to more clandestine deliveries and children being raised underground. As the second affirmative speaker stated, this is evidently a slippery slope fallacy, as the speaker lacks any definitive evidence to support his claims and furthermore grounds his claims on fallacious hypothetical situations, invalidating his argument. As questioned by the second affirmative speaker, understanding its risks, realistically, how many parents do you think would secretly give birth in comparison to a psychological exam? In addition, it must also be addressed that the second negative speaker has committed an observational selection fallacy by misconstruing the facts as to imply only 10% of mental illnesses are intergenerational, when in fact this statistic is specific to bipolar disorders. Furthermore, he also stated that having to pass a psychological exam to have children is an infringement of human rights. And I realize why one may assume that. However, I must also state that the proposal is not to eradicate the right of reproduction for the mentally ill, but merely the suggestion that if someone does suffer from psychological issues, they seek treatment, not only for their own health, but most importantly, for the mental health of an innocent child. As per Article 27 by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child, children have the right to a standard of living that is good enough to meet their physical and mental needs, entitling the child with the right to live in a safe and stable home. The second negative speaker also mentioned the financial economic impact of compulsory psychological examinations. He spoke of the apparent deficiency in psychiatrists and therapists we as a society would face as a direct result of these examinations. This is false, as in terms of the excessive number of patients, by the second year of this program, a maximum of 120,000 patients would require support. This means that each psychologist receives approximately 4 patients as a result of this program. And not to mention, these calculations exclude thousands of additional social workers, occupational therapists, and psychiatrists that may be available to help. Thus, contrary to the second negative speaker's claims, the implementation of this program will significantly benefit families and is in no form detrimental to the economic state of Australia. Our first speaker outlined the effect that mental illness in parents has on children, as well as the intergenerational impact this induces. She discussed the unfortunate prominence of mental illnesses in adults, with approximately 1 million innocent children living with a parent suffering from a mental illness. She further spoke of the emotional absence and reduced empathy evident in mentally ill parents. Subsequently, as verified by the South Australian Department for Families and Communities, mentally ill parents lack the aptitude to perform essential duties, such as feeding, clothing, and nurturing their children. She further discussed the intergenerational cycle of mental illnesses that develops in individuals with mentally ill parents, which incites a recurring pattern of suffering in the form of issues such as depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and ADHD. To conclude her opening argument, the first speaker affirmed the significance of psychological testing to halt this exact cycle. Our second speaker reasoned as to why psychological testing is a valid solution to solve this issue concerning mental health in parents. As she mentioned, psychological testing is highly effective in evaluating a patient's cognitive functioning, and furthermore, the testing is conducted by qualified professionals, increasing its reliability. She also discussed how, as per the American Psychological Association, psychological testings are recognized to be as valid as medical tests, and a further 75% of patients admitted to public mental health services improved notably. The second affirmative speaker also affirmed the current use of psychological assessments to measure employees' mental fitness in numerous jobs. She further questioned that if simply for employment in certain careers, psychological examinations are vital for something as personally and socially valuable and as complex as raising a child, there should be no contemplation. Additionally, she said that psychological testing will substantially help destigmatize mental health and will encourage individuals to seek help if necessary. With 45% of the population experiencing a mental disorder at least once in their lifetime, deeming psychological assessments as compulsory obligates individuals to undergo such testing. Therefore, it allows for mental illnesses to be detected earlier and normalizes the discussion regarding the subject. Hence, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the affirmative team earnestly believes that establishing psychological testing as compulsory for all potential parents would not only benefit the parents and children, but society as a whole. To conclude, mental illnesses are a critical issue affecting 5 million Australians. And so a compulsory psychological examination that would help improve people's health, well-being, and essentially quality of life shouldn't be so disregarded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen.
I now call upon the third negative speaker, Joa Faiello.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of our debate is that potential parents should pass a compulsory psychological examination before being allowed to have children. We, the negative team, believe this statement is false. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that mentally ill parents will pass this mental illness onto the children and thus the cycle will repeat itself. Although, even if the parent is mentally fit before giving birth, this could very easily change over days, months, or even years. This would defeat the purpose of the test in the first place. According to Mental Health America, depression, anxiety, and OCD may surface after pregnancy. Also, according to the NHS UK, 1 in 10 women suffer from postnatal depression, meaning this is not a rare situation. These conditions will affect the ability to properly care for the child and may even cause long-lasting trauma. Realistically, in order for this to maybe work, we would need to conduct this examination every few months for at least the first 1,000 days of the child's life. The first 1,000 days of the child's life is when the child shapes his development and well-being. This raises feasible issues that I'm sure even the affirmative team can understand. The second affirmative speaker has tried to rehash the first argument and explain why a psychological exam will prevent years of mental trauma. But this is wrong, considering a mentally stable parent can still cause trauma. According to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, a caregiver's response to action can have an effect on the child's mental health. This response can range from believing that the child is telling the truth all the way to physically abusing the child. The only way that we could prevent this trauma is through evaluating the beliefs and morals. But then the question arises, what are the right and wrong morals? What is right to one might not be wrong to another. The reality is there is no current way to completely eradicate mental trauma in children. So all that we as a society can do to ensure that if it does happen, the child has access to the right support. Now currently, Australia is ranked 9th in the world in terms of healthcare, meaning it has great support for its population. If children are struggling with mental illness, there are plenty of resources such as school counsellors, websites, free prioritised GPs, hospitals, specialised for children, free psychological support, and many other programs and resources readily available. The second speaker's third argument was that it will stigmatise mental illness, but in reality, it will do the opposite. When in history has forcing a population to do something that absolutely violates their human rights led to them speaking about it in a positive manner? Never. Instead, it will lead to panic, conspiracies, and social and political defiance. Case in point, the rumours about the COVID vaccine becoming compulsory. How many conspiracies have you heard about the COVID vaccine and some of the ridiculous reasons why you shouldn't take it? Now we have mass public protests in the middle of a viral pandemic, which is simply spreading the disease even faster. Is it not logical to say that if you make something compulsory, it will lead to destigmatization and normalization? It is more likely to deter people who really need to undertake the test due to negative attention that forces it upon the parents will have. Our first speaker spoke to you about the fact that this will lead to more secret births. This will be out of fear. This will put the child's well-being and even life at risk due to possible unsanitary environments and lack of access to immediate medical attention. For example, let's say someone keeps their pregnancy a secret. Due to this, they don't have the ultrasound and other forms of checking the baby's health. Now, it also happens that this baby has an abnormal heart defect that requires immediate medical attention. If the baby is not born in the hospital, it will die due to lack of medical attention. Now, please consider where this infant will be buried. Our second affirmative speaker spoke to you about the infringement on human rights, which is true, and it is a basic human right to give birth to a child. This is morally wrong, as every woman deserves a chance to give birth. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we deny the idea that all parents should be forced to pass a psychological exam on the grounds that it will lead to more clandestine births, and it is an infringement on the human rights. And if you still don't agree with us, tell me how you would feel after meeting the love of your life, you will refuse the biological, civil, and human right to have a child because of a number on a piece of paper. Thank you.
Okay, before I announce the winners of the debate, at the beginning I did forget to thank someone who has been helping out exceptionally well, Jacob Busuttil. Please give him a round of applause. He's done a great job. I'll give his parents a quick plug. They're videographers for weddings, special events, so if you need anything, just ask Jacob. Okay, so I'll explain how the scores are calculated. So each individual speaker gets a score. They are being graded on everything from their presentation, so how they look, how they present their arguments in terms of body language, intonation, expression, eye contact, and fluency. They are getting graded on their argument, so how well constructed their argument is, how many persuasive or rhetorical devices that they have used in their arguments. They are also getting graded on the accuracy of their rebuttals, whether they're addressing each point that the opposition has made. So there is a lot that goes into the individual grade. They also can potentially lose marks for being too far under time or too far over time. The overall winners for the debate. Did we get it? Overall winners for the Stage 1 final debates for 2021 is the affirmative team. Thank you very much. So, guys, I'd just like to thank you guys for being an amazing audience. I really appreciate the amount of respect that you showed during the debate. That was an exceptional effort. Please give yourselves a very quick round of applause.